A worker just struck a strange object beneath the concrete of Anaheim's subway project. Pulling it out, it wasn't a piece of construction material, but the Mickey Mouse head from a costume, and beside it, the remains of 2 children. Only one person present recognized it. It was linked to a shocking disappearance from 1985, which was never an accident. It was a crime, deliberate. And the killer might have worn a mask for nearly 30 years, hidden in the crowd that still believed Disneyland was the happiest place on Earth. Anaheim, California, March 12, 2013, 09:41 a.m. Stop! Something under this concrete. It's not right. The second operator's voice crackled over the radio, urgent, somewhat out of sync with the deafening roar of excavators and cranes operating densely on site. An engineer in a white hard hat rushed over, his face mask still pulled down to his chin, shouting over the engine noise. "Report clearly, tunnel team number 3. What did you just hit?" Underground, the excavator had just dug a little over a meter into the old layer of earth when it struck a mass of material not registered on the technical design plans. It wasn't a water pipe, nor rebar, nor old foundation concrete. A worker, caked in mud, scrambled to the edge of the pit, his trembling hand extended, holding something provisionally wrapped in a safety jacket. The old plastic object was warped and cracked, yet immediately recognizable. A Mickey Mouse head. It wasn't a common toy or a plastic fabric hat sold in a souvenir shop. This was the head portion of a performance costume with technical stitching, heavy, rigid. Its inner strap rotted and the foam lining peeling in chunks. On the edge of the foam, a tuft of short, curly black hair, stuck with a dark brown, dried blood stain. No one spoke for the next 10 seconds. The excavator powered down. The crane lowered. Other engineering teams began moving orange fences closer to the area of pit number 3. A head supervisor whispered over the radio, "Temporarily suspend the West Anaheim Metro excavation. Inform General Command Office, possibly related to a criminal case." Less than 15 minutes later, as the rescue team and local police arrived to cordon off the area, the technical team continued excavating as requested by the investigation, and they found the rest. A small bone fragment, no longer than a palm, curved, as thin as a baby's. Beside it, a hand-embroidered button with a rose attached to a piece of pink fabric torn at the edge. But a blurred inscription could still be read. Disneyland, Anaheim. Entertainment depth. The investigation team quickly dispatched the forensic team to the scene. They removed the wet soil from below, using brushes and gloves to gently scrape the mud adhering to the objects. "Not just one," a forensic expert murmured. "There are at least 2 skeletons, with almost identical lengths and bone structures, probably twins." Another stood up, addressing the group of police officers. "There are scratch marks from inside the old concrete. The victims may have been locked alive here. They didn't die immediately upon burial." He had barely finished the sentence when the chief engineer blurted out, "This isn't a sewer, nor any technical section of the old subway line. This place never had anything underneath. Someone dug and buried this with their own hands." It was 10:52 a.m. and the entire site was cordoned off. The Anaheim Homicide Department was ordered to temporarily transfer the case to the Cold Case Unit, a team specializing in unsolved cases from many years ago. Less than 40 minutes later, a civilian vehicle with government plates parked 30 meters from the site. A tall, thin man emerged from the car wearing a blue-gray button-down shirt and a plainclothes police badge on his shoulder. Captain Julian Marquez, head of the cold case unit, did not go directly into the pit, but observed from afar for 30 seconds. Then he put on disposable gloves, approached the edge of the pit, bent down to observe closely the Mickey head, which had been placed aside in a plastic bag, and near it, 2 small bone fragments and a button. Marquez said briefly, "I want the entire excavation cordoned off. Do not touch anything else. My team will take over the evidence and the scene in the next 6 hours." He pulled his phone from his inner jacket pocket and called the crime database center directly. "Give me a list of all children reported missing at Disneyland Anaheim from 1980 to 1990. Filter by summer, prioritizing twin or sibling cases. Perhaps," he continued, turning his attention back to the forensic expert, "we just unearthed a secret kept for nearly 30 years, in the place once called the happiest in the world. And on the morning of March 12, 2013, a disappearance that seemed to have faded into oblivion since the last century had just officially returned. The only difference was that this time, it wasn't a theme park game. This time, it was a real crime. Going back many years, the origin of the mysteries that lay deep in the earth had just been discovered. In the children's play area, small footsteps shuffled across the park pavement, blending with the cheerful music. Isabel Ortega, then 28, held her twin daughters' hands and led them through the main entrance of Disneyland Anaheim for the first time, and also for the last. Marisol, on the left, tightly clutched the strap of her mother's cloth bag, looking around. Lucia, on the right, gently bit her nails and occasionally looked up at Isabel and nodded when asked, "Are you okay?" Both girls wore ivory white fabric overalls, pink t-shirts, and white canvas shoes, a combination Isabel had chosen to make her daughters look identical. A 5th birthday gift that had cost her almost half a year's savings to buy. The park was crowded, but Isabel remained calm, walking and taking photos. Her small black Sony camera hung from her neck with film number 11 just taken. She reloaded the film, turned the lens cap, and crouched down to ask, "Do you want a picture with Mickey? Now you'll stay still, won't you, Lucia?" Lucia nodded. Marisol took 2 small jumps and pulled her mother's hand, pointing across the small plaza, where an artist dressed as Mickey Mouse with his heavy costume head waved at the children. The man in Mickey's costume stood apart from the main group of performers, near a bush by the path leading to Fantasyland. He didn't speak, just leaned slightly and extended his arms as if inviting. A child nearby laughed heartily and ran to hug his legs. Marisol immediately pulled Lucia and stood by Mickey's feet. Lucia still turned to her mother, awaiting confirmation. Isabel nodded, raised the camera. Both girls looked towards the lens. Mickey gently hugged their shoulders. Isabel pressed the shutter. A small click sounded. "Done. Let's take another. Smile." As she reloaded the film for the second shot, Isabel felt a slight twist in her stomach. She looked at the sign. The women's restrooms weren't far. She turned to the Mickey costume artist, smiling apologetically. "Could you let the girls stay here for 3 minutes? I'll be right back." He nodded. Still not speaking, he just made an okay gesture with his hand and gently stroked the heads of the 2 girls as if to reassure them. Isabel turned and hurried towards the restroom. As she went, she thought, "It's fine, he's an official artist, and he's right next to where I took the photo." 7 minutes later, 15:01. When Isabel rushed back through the Fantasyland entrance, she immediately felt that something wasn't right. The spot where Mickey had stood before was empty. There was no artist, no 2 children, No one taking pictures nearby. Isabel quickened her pace, her eyes scanning the area. She searched for Mickey everywhere. He wasn't there. A Donald Duck artist appeared in the distance, but no one resembled the man who had just watched her daughters. "Excuse me, did you see the Mickey artist who was here a moment ago?" Isabel asked a security guard. He shrugged. "There are 2 or 3 Mickey artists each shift, ma'am. They rotate in each zone. Maybe he already changed shifts. And 2 twin girls, pink shirts, white pants. Did you see anyone take them away?" "No one has reported anything. Maybe the children are playing around here. Children usually run around a lot here." Isabel turned, calling her daughters' names loudly. With each call, she changed direction. "Marisol, Lucia." Her voice blended with the music from the Disneyland train speakers, children's laughter, and invitations from marketing employees in the new play area. She ran back towards the main photo area. No Mickey artist seemed familiar. One dressed as Mickey in another corner was taller, thinner, and was talking to a group of Japanese tourists. Isabel turned around. The entrance to the technical area was closed with an iron fence, no one guarding it. 3:12 p.m. More than 10 minutes after she left. At this moment, everything was empty. Isabel screamed her daughters' names again, her voice turning hoarse, her hands trembling as she pulled out her camera. The last photo she had taken was still in the camera, not having been rewound. Another security guard, older, seeing her in a panic, approached to ask. Isabel, sobbing, pointed forward. "I left my 2 daughters with Mickey right there, 7 minutes ago. Now no one is there." The security department was immediately called. Another reported over the radio. A coordinator arrived to reassure Isabel, asking her daughters' names, their age, and a description of their clothes. Isabel brokenly said, "Marisol, Lucia, 5 years old, twins. White overalls, pink shirts, hair tied back on the sides. They were with the Mickey artist." The coordinator asked again, "Which Mickey? Do you remember his height or his voice?" Isabel fell silent. She didn't know. The Mickey artist hadn't said anything. He hadn't smiled. He had just raised his hand and gently hugged her daughter's shoulders as they took the picture. Local police were notified in the next 30 minutes. However, Isabel's initial statements confused everyone. No employee confirmed the presence of a Mickey artist in that position at that time. No camera recorded the moment. No one saw the man leave the area. No one remembered the artist's true face because everyone only saw Mickey's head. Both girls, Marisol and Lucia, from that moment, were never seen again. Nearly 30 years later, the only thing left of that summer afternoon was the photo Isabel hadn't been able to develop and the film she hadn't been able to rewind. A mother lost her daughters in just 7 minutes, and she lost the rest of her life searching for answers. Returning to the moment the police discovered new details at the police station, the smell of old plastic mixed with dilute mud from the scene still clung to the evidence compartment when it was moved to the investigation room. Captain Julian Marquez stood in front of the forensic table, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the rotting costume head. He said nothing for almost 3 minutes, only listening intently as the forensic technician presented. "We found a blurry serial number on the inside of the plastic nape. It's an internal item, the kind that's distributed in limited quantities within the official artist system, not sold retail." Another technician opened a thick file. "Manufactured in 1984. From this line, 27 internal models were issued, used by live performers at Disneyland Anaheim since early 1985. Marquez looked up, emphasizing, That means it's not a toy tourists brought. This is something an artist received from Disney? Exactly. In the adjoining room, the bones found in the excavation were spread out on an analysis table. 2 separate glass boxes contained 2 groups of similarly sized bones. The chief forensic officer, Ms. Teresa Lujan, pointed to the hip bones. Girls, approximately 5 years old, small, still soft pelvises. Decomposition equivalent to about 28 to 30 years in humid soil and unventilated technical tunnel conditions. Marquez nodded slightly, his voice slow but without losing his usual coolness. We are dealing with a case of unlawful detention and premeditated murder. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a casual disappearance. 2:37 p.m. The same day, Anaheim Police Station Archives Room. The entire list of Mickey artists who worked on July 15, 1985, at Disneyland was extracted from the microfilm archive. The investigation team digitized and printed a list of 23 people. Of these, 4 names were crossed out in red, resigned. 2 had died. 1 had lost contact. The rest were still working or had a strict schedule history for that day. But when Marquez ran his hand across line 17, he stopped. Roberto Herrera, Category C artist, shift change in Fantasyland. Time without internal communication signal from 2:58 p.m. to 3:15 p.m. Note: did not report shift change, no administrative sanction, resigned 2 months later. Unknown reason for leaving the system. Marquez asked, "Are there any cameras or records of him leaving his position?" No. No one reported him missing his shift. No one said they saw him after 2:45 p.m. The system at that time didn't have GPS or electronic attendance tracking. Reason for dismissal? None. The file only says, "Withdrawal from performance contract." Marquez pulled out a board. He printed 23 profile photos of the Mickey artists from July 15, 1985, pasting them one by one. Upon reaching Herrera, he paused. The old, worn identification photo showed nothing remarkable on Herrera's face. Hair parted to the side, straight nose, eyes looking directly at the camera. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. Just emptiness. "This face," he said softly, "is not in any statement." A female officer beside him asked again, "No witness mentioned him?" Marquez shook his head, his hand on the photo. "No, because no one saw his face. He was wearing the Mickey head, and he disappeared while everyone only remembered the smile on the mouse's face." 6:15 p.m. The same evening in the evidence investigation room. A young forensic technician who had just finished her shift approached, placing a folder of photocopied documents from the Disney archive on the table. The technical blueprints of the 1984 Mickey costume. Inside the costume head, there was a lightweight steel frame and a mesh that obstructed vision. No one could clearly see the artist from the outside. Mickey Mouse's eyes were made of dark, opaque glass, allowing sight out, but not in. Marquez looked at the technical drawings, his voice deepening. A person with criminal intent could take advantage of that. To hide completely behind a symbol of happiness. When the investigation room closed at the end of the day, the board with the artist's photos was still lit. The light was focused exactly on the line below Roberto Herrera's photo. Position, unconfirmed. Off-duty time, 17 minutes. Conclusion, never verified. Captain Julian Marquez sat alone in the analysis room. the yellow light reflecting on the archive board in front of him. Roberto Herrera's photo. That face was almost indistinguishable. A type of person you'd forget if you met them on the street, just by turning away. That bothered Marquez. He returned to his desk, opened the personal file sent from the Jalisco State Archives office, where Herrera was born. Unknown parents. No official birth certificate. Admitted to Santa Veronica Convent Orphanage, Jalisco State in 1963, when he was under 3 years old. Notes from caregivers. He used to sit still for hours staring out the window. He didn't participate in group games. He only showed interest when allowed to draw or act. Several times he drew 2 identical children, with hair tied back on the sides, dressed in the same clothes, but he gave no explanations. At 17, Herrera left the convent and studied theater in Tijuana. His academic record with teacher comments said, "Good acting ability, knows how to draw attention when disguised, but not suitable for normal roles. Tends to become emotionally attached to child characters, especially cartoon figures." Marquez scribbled a line beside it. Obsession with control? Idealization of purity? Disneyland, Anaheim, personnel file, 1985. Herrera began working as a Mickey artist in Fantasyland in May 1985. In the 2 months he worked, he left no clear signs of misconduct, but 2 previous parks had already fired him. Santa Funland, Texas, 1982. Dismissal note. Frequently found observing children alone without interacting. Once accused of taking a child outside the camera surveillance area, but there was no proof. Festival World, New Mexico, 1983. Used costume change as an excuse to stay in the prop warehouse longer than allowed. Another artist discovered Herrera removing his costume head and adjusting the inner strap, adding padding, for no apparent reason. Marquez held the 1985 Fantasyland prop warehouse diagram, pointing to the technician's corner where there were no cameras and it was locked with a code. He could have entered there, borrowed a second Mickey costume, the same size, hid it in the warehouse, went out to perform a first time, interacted with the 2 girls, gained their trust. Then, he returned to the warehouse, changed into the other Mickey costume, appeared a second time in another position, creating an alibi or distracting witnesses. His voice was monotone, as if narrating an already staged play. When the girl's mother went to the restroom, he only needed 30 seconds to take the girls to the technical hallway behind the play area. A place with no tourists, no cameras, no one checking. It was summer, and the underground construction of the old sewer line was half excavated. On the table was a 1985 technical construction plan. The sewer line connecting Fantasyland to the outside of the park was stalled due to budget problems, leaving an unfinished tunnel section. He knew about that section. He chose precisely this spot to hide the bodies. Then he poured concrete over them, like an abandoned concrete slab. Marquez turned to look at the Mickey head. The strap was cut, with traces of repaired glue inside. A technician entered, placing a folder with newly scanned photos. We recovered a list of supporting artists from July 15th, including substitutes. Herrera was not on the main afternoon shift, which means he shouldn't have been there. He said in an almost whispered voice, "We live in a society where everyone looks at the symbol. No one looks at the person behind it." Marquez stared at the archive board. In his mind still echoed the old question no one had been able to answer. If he could disappear so easily, where was he? What did he do? And what did he wait for to return for almost 30 years? Only one thing was certain. He never acted on impulse. He created a system. He hid behind it. And all of society helped him do it. But first of all, he needed to report the new developments in the case to a very important person. The only one who hadn't given up from day one and for the past 28 years. Isabel Ortega slowly opened the door. The small house, hidden on a Santa Ana street, was nothing special, save for a dried bougainvillea from the previous spring. The woman, in her mid-50s, came out to the entrance wearing a gray fabric jacket, her hair pulled back, and her eyes did not flinch for a second at the sight of the two plainclothes police officers waiting for her. Captain Marquez showed his badge and said very simply, "We need you to come with us to the police station." Isabel nodded. She asked nothing. Her eyes had long since lost all hope in police investigations, but she still decided to go with them, only for the sole reason that there was still someone who hadn't forgotten her daughters. She turned, took an old silver-brown leather bag from the house, slung it over her shoulder, and walked directly to the waiting patrol car. Anaheim Investigation Department, 09:05 a.m. The meeting room on the third floor had no ceiling lights, only the faint light from the window illuminating the glass table. Isabel sat opposite Captain Marquez, her leather bag on the table, with no rush to open it or any extra words. He began to speak, his voice deep but firm. "We just found the remains of two girls under an old drain in the Anaheim metro area. We believe—" "I already know." Marquez paused. Isabel continued to stare, her eyes unwavering. "I heard the news at 7 a.m. on the radio. The excavation site is less than 2 blocks from Disneyland. Close enough." He pushed a folder of files towards her. Photos of the broken Mickey head, a sample of old pink fabric. Scene photos. Isabel looked at each one without emotional reaction. But when she reached the fabric with the inscription, "Disneyland Anaheim, Entertainment Depth," she paused longer. "That is the same shirt model I bought on July 13th, 1985, at Kiosk 4 on Main Street." Then she opened her bag. She took out one thing after another. A collection of simulated photographs of the faces of two girls from 1986 to 2013, which she had commissioned graphic design students to recreate each year. An old Disneyland map with red circles marked with a pen. Places I asked, places I was denied, places without cameras, suspicious but inaccessible places. And finally, a clandestine 4x6 color-printed photo with the edge slightly bent. Marquez took it, using tweezers to place it under the light. The photo was blurry, but clear. Isabel was standing near the Walt Disney and Mickey statue. In the distance, a man was in the shadow of a tree watching her. What year is this photo from? From 1992. An old roll film camera. I was carrying it to take landscapes, but when I came back, I saw that person in the frame. I don't know why I took it. I just felt someone was watching me for a very long time. Marquez took Roberto Herrera's profile photo from the archive board and placed it next to the photo in his hand. The photo was immediately sent to the forensics department. The old 1992 film photo was enlarged, each pixel processed to clarify it with brightness enhancement software. The man in the background of the photo was still just a blurry figure under the shadow of a tree, wearing a long-sleeved shirt, a small brimmed hat. His face indistinct, just looking towards Isabel, who at that moment was handing out flyers near the entrance to Mickey's Toontown. Captain Marquez, with his arms crossed, stood behind the forensic technician, his gaze fixed on the man's nape and left side of his face. Ignore the face for now. Show me the proportion of the neck and left ear. The specialist nodded and enlarged the image area. A 3D measurement frame appeared. The measurement lines of the ear angle proportion, neck tilt, and jaw length were compared with Roberto Herrera's 1985 identity photo from his file. The proportion matches at 86.4%. It's not enough to be damning evidence in court. But if you ask me about the probability of matching another person, it's extremely low. Marquez nodded. He turned to Isabel, who until then had remained motionless at the edge of the table, her hands clasped, her eyes fixed on the figure in the photo. I never remember faces well. But that gaze, I see it every year. I saw it 3 times, 3 years in a row. But only that year, I pulled out my camera to take a photo. Why? Because that time he looked at me for too long. I don't know why. I just knew that if I didn't take it, I wouldn't forgive myself. Marquez pasted the photo onto the investigation board, next to the photo of the 2 girls. So he came back. And you saw him, even if you didn't recognize him immediately. Marquez quickly jotted down in his notebook. The victim returned to the crime scene. The culprit also returned, observed, no contact, no intervention. But to make sure his case had not yet been discovered, no one had discovered anything else that worried him. Marquez ordered the analysis team to retrieve all security recordings from Disneyland's camera system from 1991 to 1993. The period when Isabel had returned to the park and believed she was being followed. But only 45 minutes later, the technician reported, all original tapes have been overwritten according to the storage cycle. There are no original copies. A cut. The whole group remained silent for a few seconds. Isabel looked up for the first time in the session, showing clear disappointment. But then, from the auxiliary table, a young employee with headphones stood up. Wait, I found a secondary backup from 1992. The folder is called Incident Record, EHS Lawsuit. Backup related to safety litigation. The system is required to store a minimum of 25 years according to insurance requirements. Marquez approached. Put the tape in. Fast forward to July 15th, 1992, between 3:00 p.m. and 4:00 p.m. Projection screen, security tape, Disneyland, 1992. Camera number 11. Frame from a distant angle, a position near the flower garden in front of the Walt Disney statue. Isabel, about 30 years old at the time, wearing a brown dress, with her hair tied back low, and she was handing out flyers to passers-by. In the left corner of the frame, a man appeared. He wore a white shirt, a hat. He stood still, motionless, not talking to anyone. Time in the frame, 3:12 p.m. until 3:24 p.m. The man remained motionless. He never took his eyes off Isabel's position. At 3:25 p.m., Isabel left the frame. A second later, the man turned his head and followed her. The technician rewound and slowed down the movement. He stopped right at the frame where the man raises his hand to scratch his left ear. Marquez pointed to it. This movement is very characteristic. He opened Herrera's 1980 medical file, registered at Santa Veronica Convent. Diagnosis: scar tissue lesion on the left ear nerve, causing chronic itching. Habit of scratching ear with middle finger, repeating under stress. 7:22 p.m. The investigation panel updated. Marquez fixed the photo taken with the 1992 camera on the main board. The text line was added below. Same location, same day, same time, same characteristic physical reaction. Beside it was Isabel's clandestine photo. And beside it, Herrera's 1985 personnel photo. 3 photos, 3 moments, but the same body, the same habit, the same gaze. Isabel stood up, picked up the file folder. Before leaving the room, she said, "Every year I come, I think I'm weak, that I can't accept reality. But if he also came, it means I was never wrong. And if he's still alive, he'll come back this year." Marquez turned to the technical team. "Get ready. July 15th is approaching. Disneyland. Facial recognition network, costumes. Review every artist on site. He won't escape again." But before July 15th, the investigation team made decisive new discoveries. From the coordinates of the local bank where a person named Roberto H. regularly withdrew his subsidy each month since 2006, Captain Marquez's investigation team followed the GPS system of mobile ATMs, tracing each access point, each walking route to the withdrawal location, each time separated by only a few steps, never straying from a 300-meter radius around an abandoned gas station. He definitely doesn't drive, and he left no transfer trace. This is the lifestyle of someone who knows they can be found. The technical team officer reported as the investigation team's van crossed the asphalt line and entered a dusty dirt area with dry stones. Barely 10 minutes after driving in, they saw a faded silver caravan parked alone in the middle of a wasteland. No windows, no curtains. Outside hung a rotten wooden sign handwritten in white chalk. "Do not touch, do not knock." Marquez got out first, indicating not to draw weapons. He went directly to the caravan door, knocking gently twice. There was no response. On the 3rd knock, the door opened automatically from within. The air was thick with the smell of burnt plastic, old paper, and dry sweat from people exposed to the sun. Under the dim light filtering through a crack in the roof, the police saw a clean, shiny Mickey Mouse head on the table, neatly placed, facing the door. Everything else in the caravan was messy. Dirty dishes, scraps of cloth, children's books printed in the 80s, newspaper clippings with the words Disneyland Anaheim highlighted in red with a marker. Roberto Herrera was sitting at the back of the cabin, between 2 curtains hanging like a small stage. He wore old fabric clothes, long hair, sparse beard, and sunken eyes as if he hadn't slept enough in years. Without showing surprise or resistance, he just looked up and stared at Marquez when he entered and stopped in front of the table. "Roberto Herrera?" Marquez asked briefly. He remained silent for a few seconds, and then replied, neither denying nor confirming, only whispering as if he were speaking in his own role. "I am the one who keeps the children's memories. You have already forgotten them." Marquez did not react, only looked at the Mickey head that remained strangely motionless on the table, as if it were watching them, with an expressionless face, round, empty eyes. The same ones that once made 2 twin girls stop, laugh for the first time in their lives. And for the last. Another officer entered, checked Herrera's hands. He carried no weapons. The entire caravan had no identification documents, no phone, no communication history. But from the serial number engraved on the base of the Mickey head, Marquez determined this was one of the 3 internal costumes distributed in July 1985. The other 2 had been returned on time. This one, which had been reported missing, was now right in front of him, still shiny as if it had been cleaned every day. An on-site interrogation was conducted. "Why didn't you leave? For 28 years, why did you stay in California?" Herrera continued to stare towards the door without blinking. Then he said slowly, Because this is the stage. I set it up. I will perform here. The audience returns every year on time, and I am never late for a show. Are you referring to Isabel Ortega? Marquez tightened his pen. He nodded slightly. For the first time, his expression twitched slightly as a sign of mourning, but there was no trace of guilt. Every year she would come. She would walk through the door. She would stand in the same spot. She would search among the crowd. That's when I knew the play wasn't over. And when do you plan to finish? Marquez asked. Herrera smiled, a slight but prolonged smile, as if he had just finished an ancient play. When people remove the last layer of dust, when you dig up the memory that everyone buried. 0744, when the search team indicated to leave. They confiscated all evidence, the Mickey head, old documents, a timeline notebook, photos of children pasted on the wall, among them 2 pencil drawings of 2 strangely identical girls with hair tied back on the sides. In the corner of the drawing, he had written, "Birthday July 15th, show start time." Herrera did not resist, did not escape. He waited to be found. For him, this was the final act, the last part of a play that lasted almost 30 years. And the only person he was waiting for was not the police, but Isabel. When Marquez left the caravan, he took one last look. The door had no lock. The table had no dust. And on the Mickey head, there was no human face, only memories. The interrogation room had been prepared since the previous night. There were no two-way mirrors, no intense lights. Captain Marquez asked for the low yellow ceiling lights to be kept on, because he knew Herrera didn't respond to the police. He only spoke when he believed he was acting in a play. On the table was a blank statement, a recorder in the center, and 2 witnesses, an internal recording specialist and the assigned public defender. But as soon as he entered the room, Herrera looked at the lawyer, nodded, and said, "I don't need him. This role only requires a monologue. Sit down, don't get in the way." No one intervened. According to regulations, he had the right to refuse a lawyer if he declared voluntarily. And Roberto Herrera sat upright, hands on the table, back straight, eyes fixed on the recorder's lens. 0912. The recording begins. "My name is Roberto Herrera, born in 1954 in Tijuana. I worked for Disneyland Anaheim in the summer of 1985 in the artist department, cartoon characters. I was dismissed in September of the same year for no public reason. But I know well why. I will tell everything. I don't need prompting. I remember everything." Marquez did not interrupt. He nodded slightly, maintaining eye contact with his interlocutor. Herrera began to recount, without hesitation, without doubt, without repeating. His voice was monotone, as if he were reciting a memorized script. "I took the second Mickey costume from maintenance warehouse number 4. I knew the shift supervisor had a habit of not locking the door. I entered around 11 a.m., took the costume without recording equipment. No one saw me. I took it to warehouse 3, where there was a compartment of old materials that few checked. That afternoon, I performed as usual. My shift ended at 3:45 p.m. I left the performance area, returned to the warehouse, put on the second Mickey costume, and went back to the entertainment zone. I had seen the 2 girls since the morning. They were identical. White overalls, pink shirts. They were with their mother, smiling, as if they didn't know how dangerous this world was." He paused for an instant. No regret, no triumph, just as if recalling a line he hadn't spoken in years. I approached. No one suspected Mickey. I sat down, waved. They approached. The one named Lucia waved first. Marisol hugged my leg. No one asked for documents. No one asked my name. Everyone only saw Mickey. I took the girls through the technical hallway, the back door of the show area. The old key I still had from the previous week. I opened the door, led them to the technical level, and then to the basement. I locked them in there. In the half-excavated sewer section, no one had been down since June due to a water leak. They cried. I told them to shut up. But then, I no longer heard them clearly. I didn't do anything to the girls. Mickey did everything. Marquez looked up. Still not saying anything, Herrera continued. When I put on the costume, I stopped being myself. I no longer had emotions or a name. I only had the mask. And the girls? They only saw that face. They didn't know who was inside. At first, I thought of keeping only one girl. But looking again, I didn't know which one was Lucia, which one was Marisol. They were too similar, as if by keeping one, I already had both. Afterwards, I took the Mickey head. I cleaned it. I kept it in the warehouse. The next day, I returned the first costume as if nothing had happened. No one checked. No one asked why I was missing for 17 minutes. No one knew I changed my own shift. 2 months later, I was fired. Not for that, just because I once stared at a child client for too long. Management said I wasn't suitable for a child environment. But I no longer needed to be there. I already had what I needed to keep. Why didn't you flee? Marquez asked. This was the only question he asked during the entire interrogation. Herrera smiled slightly. Not with mockery, not with regret. Every year she returns. Isabel Ortega. So do I. Because if she keeps searching, then my role isn't over. And I never leave a performance unfinished. Herrera did not suffer from paranoid delusions. He was lucid. He remembered every detail. But he divided reality into 2 levels. One was Herrera, the invisible man, and the other was Mickey, the one who had the power to guide all children to the end of the play. For him, death was not a crime. It was the final curtain. And until the last person sitting in the audience, Isabel, decided to leave, he would remain in his role. His case was quickly brought to trial due to the seriousness of the facts. The entire courtroom remained silent as the court clerk read the case name. The state of California accuses Roberto Herrera of first-degree murder. Victims, Lucia and Marisol Ortega, age 2, disappeared in 1985. Bodies discovered in March 2013. Isabel Ortega entered the courtroom, her steps firm without bowing her head. She carried no photos, wore no black. She sat in the first row, not turning to look at the accused, but also not avoiding the media cameras. Her eyes were strangely calm, as if the great storm had passed long ago. And now, only one thing remained: to face it. Roberto Herrera was led in with his hands cuffed behind his back, dressed in the orange prison uniform, with short hair, his face weathered by the sun, but neither shrinking nor flinching. He sat down, looking at no one. The prosecutor emphasized the unforced confessions, which matched in detail the physical evidence, especially the 1985 data extracted from the maintenance warehouse and the 1992 security cameras. The forensic expert confirmed the match of the children's bones with Isabel Ortega's DNA samples. The public defender did not refute, only requested a reduction in sentence for the accused's cooperation and honesty. Isabel stepped onto the witness stand. She carried no papers, consulted no files. She only pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, a sheet with her daughter's birth dates, a few short phrases the two girls used to practice. "Mommy, I love you. I'm Lucia. I'm Marisol. We're the same. But you know who's who." She read without trembling. Then she folded it and placed it on the stand. She looked up and stared at Herrera. He did not avoid her gaze, nor did he smile. Without words, for the first time since his arrest, Herrera said nothing. The judge was about to read the sentence when Herrera unexpectedly raised his hand. The lawyer turned to ask him in a low voice. He nodded. "Allow me to say one thing. Just one sentence." The court allowed it. Herrera stood up, turning completely towards Isabel. His voice was deep, slow. "I have nothing more to act." Isabel did not blink. She replied immediately, without hesitation, "You never acted. You were the real fear." No one interrupted. The entire courtroom remained silent for 2 seconds that felt like suffocation. The court declares, Roberto Herrera is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Guards led Herrera from the defendant's bench. As he passed, he turned to look at Isabel one last time. His gaze no longer held illusions, or roles, or masks. Isabel met his gaze, without flinching, without frowning, without backing down. A gaze, as if someone had waited 28 years not to have to bow their head. That day was not sunny. Isabel Ortega went down to the flower plot behind the small church at the end of San Gabriel Street. A plot she had voluntarily offered to clear weeds from, pull roots, put up signs, and request permits to turn it into a community garden, not to grow vegetables, but to cultivate memories. From the cloth bag in her hand, she took out a small, old, silver tin box, inside which were ashes divided into 2, with clear labels. Lucia Ortega, 1983-1985. Marisol Ortega, 1983 to 1985. No pastor, no hymns, only a few old friends from the single mother's community, and a single person in plain clothes with a police badge hidden under his jacket, Captain Marquez. Isabel scattered the ashes at the foot of a jasmine bush. She said nothing. She did not bow her head. She only took a small embroidered flower button from her pocket and placed it in the damp earth. "I promise that this time Mom won't let anyone take them again," she said softly, and then stood tall. 3 days later, Marquez entered the cold case unit office almost at noon. In his hand, he carried a brown file box with a red label. Herrera, Roberto, resolved, closed. He placed it on the wooden shelf next to dozens of cases that had remained hidden, then reappeared and faded into oblivion again. Then he returned to his desk, sat down. In front of him was a thin yellow envelope Isabel had sent that morning. Inside it contained a complete copy of Herrera's interrogation transcript. The original photo taken at Disneyland in 1992. A list of 5 families with children who disappeared under similar circumstances. Young, disappeared in entertainment areas. No one saw the face of the one who took them. They only remembered. It was a costumed character. A handwritten line below. "I am no longer looking for my 2 daughters, but there are others who are still waiting. Isabel." That same night, at the investigation department, Marquez was packing his things to leave when a colleague knocked on the door, handing him a thin, old file folder. Captain, an old file from another state. It got mixed up in the Arizona file review. Child disappeared in 1987, also at an amusement park. Marquez took it, opening the first page. His eyes immediately stopped at the section underlined in red by the state investigator. The last witness described, "I saw Mickey Mouse take the child from the play area." But when asked if he was sure it was a real person, the witness only said, "I don't know. I didn't see his face. I only clearly remember it was Mickey." He stopped. His heart tightened not from fear, but from a quiet intuition. The Herrera case was just a link. It was not the end. It was not the final act. Marquez sat down, pulled out his pen, and wrote the first line in the new opened file. No one saw his face. They only remember it was Mickey. Isabel continued to live, not consumed by tragedy. But she left a promise, like a mother who entrusts her children's memories to the only person who dared to stir the ashes. And on the other side, in the dim light of the investigation room, a police officer sat alone, looking at an old black and white photo, where there was no human face, only a huge, smiling mouse head. November 2016, 3 years after the Roberto Herrera case, Captain Julian Marquez sat alone in the cold case unit room of the Anaheim police station. The desk lamp's light cast over the wooden desk, where old time-worn files lay silently. On the table was a newly arrived gray envelope, with no sender, only a handwritten line in the left corner. Child disappeared in Desert Sun Park, 1987, Arizona. He opened the envelope. Inside was an old, faded map of Desert Sun Park, closed since 1994. A blurry black and white photo of a costumed cartoon character artist holding a small child's hand and a small piece of faded fabric, probably part of a performance uniform, with a half-embroidered letter P in red thread. On the back of the photo was a blurry pencil inscription, "I can't sleep. I still hear his laughter." There was no signature. No one left an explanation. Marquez remained silent, his gaze lingering on the piece of map, where there was a red circle marking the photo area near the side entrance leading to the parking lot. Victim: Samuel Delacroix, 6 years old. Last note in the report: seen leaving with Mickey Mouse, no cameras, no one confirmed the presence of any artist. The attendance tracking system was faulty that day. He took his phone and called the Maricopa County Police Department, Arizona, directly. His voice was monotone, but it did not hide the usual weariness. "Connect me to the cold case unit, officer. I need to reopen the 1987 disappearance case at Desert Sun Park." When asked the reason for the reinvestigation, he replied briefly, "Because people remembered a face no one had seen again." 3 weeks later, at a small print shop in Santa Ana, Isabel Ortega gently folded a stack of papers, placed them in an envelope, and sealed it. She did not write the recipient's name, only wrote a line: "To whoever dared to face fear head-on." Inside was a list of 12 child disappearance cases, all occurring in small amusement parks between 1982 and 1995. Each case was abrupt, unexplained, but with a strange coincidence. No one remembered the face of the one who took the children. Everyone only remembered that he was dressed as Mickey. In January 2017, a 9-year-old boy in a small Utah town was reported missing at a winter fair. Police found no clear traces. Surveillance cameras in the rear exit area recorded no sufficiently clear images. However, an amateur video recorded with a phone during the performance showed something different. Among the bustling crowd, A tall artist in a cheap Mickey costume passed by the stage. In a second, the camera shifted slightly. The mascot's head turned to the side. The image inside was revealed. The left ear was hollow. There was no ear. It was just a dark, deep space where human flesh had once been. In the cold archive room in Anaheim, Marquez pasted a new sheet onto the investigation board. His handwriting was strong, decisive. Roberto Herrera, the first to be arrested, but not the only one who wore a mask. Beside it was Isabel's letter. In it, she had written by hand, with few words, but enough for him to remain silent for a long time before closing it. I am no longer looking for my 2 daughters, but there are others who are still waiting. The story did not end at the trial, nor did it end when Herrera was sentenced. Because in the heart of society, where everyone smiles at the sight of a cartoon character, there are still those who use masks to hide. The children who once disappeared were not the end, but only an ellipsis. And as long as people only see the symbol and not the person behind it, there will be other Samuels. Children who never left the park on their own 2 feet. Isabel continues to live. She did not let herself be consumed by tragedy, but she left a message, like a mother who entrusts her children's memories to the only person who dared to stir the ashes. In a corner of the room, the yellow light still illuminated the old photo, where there was no human face, only a huge smiling mouse head, and Marquez sat there, staring at it. He did not smile, nor was he afraid. He was only preparing for the next case, and for justice to continue to be served. We tell this story based on real cases recorded in various U.S. states between the early 80s and mid-90s. The names of the characters, places, and some details have been modified to protect the victims' identities and respect the survival journey of those who remained. This is not just an old case unearthed, but a reminder of the children who once disappeared silently and the mothers who dedicated their entire lives to keeping that memory alive. If you have read this far, perhaps your heart stopped for an instant, as if you felt that behind those innocent smiles lies a loss that never had a name. Share this story via WhatsApp with a friend, a family member, or simply with someone you think will understand. Not to sow fear, but to remind us together. There are truths that need to be heard. There are memories that need to be protected. And sometimes, the most correct thing we can do is not let anyone be forgotten. Share it if you believe this deserves to be remembered. Who knows, somewhere someone still needs to see behind the mask.